Slowly, as if reluctant to leave the place, Fatima turned her body towards the gate, lifted her head to face the biting cold winds of a winter day in Palestine, clutched at her coat, and hurried to the road, a trembling smile crossing her face that she could not hide. Fatima scanned the surroundings with her eyes, reassuring herself that no one was watching her as she left her father's grave with that large smile. She thanked God that the bitter cold had forced people indoors, leaving no one to watch her, except perhaps a few occupation soldiers who had nothing better to do than observe people, afraid that someone might approach that settlement perched on the long hill in the city of Al-Bir, which is inseparable from the city of Ramallah, directly facing the cemetery. "It doesn't matter," Fatima said to herself. "Let them see me and call me a mad woman." Fatima's smile grew wider, and she almost burst into laughter, but she caught herself and placed a handkerchief over her mouth, pretending to wipe away the raindrops that had just begun to fall. Fatima was suddenly overwhelmed by a strong desire to stand in the middle of the road and open her arms to the falling rain until her entire body was drenched. "What if I removed my headscarf?" she mused, smiling to herself. That would certainly complete the image of madness that was overtaking her at that moment. How strange this feeling was. Why was it only today that she felt life surging through her veins? Why had the smell of rain brought back her beautiful memories without sadness or pain? She felt once again like a princess with 1,000 fairy godmothers, all eager to wave their magic wands for her happiness. Her dreams returned, that this land was hers, that house was her palace, and she would not let anyone kill her dreams or steal her feelings. She would not let anyone take away the love that filled the land around her, despite the blood, the martyrs, the bombings, and the oppression. "My dear father, I have fulfilled my promise to you. I have opened my eyes to the truth I was afraid to see. The first thing I realized was that I was deeply in love with a forbidden love, the love I thought I had forbidden myself and my son from feeling. Today, I have come to understand that I have been immersed in it all along, since the day I was born, or perhaps even before that. I believe it has always been in my blood, inherited from your free blood, and in the heartbeat I learned from my mother's pure heart. My dear brother, if my awakening has come too late, don't let it sadden you or make you angry with me. According to your theory, there is still hope for the Arabs to awaken, and there is hope for a renewed sense of Arab identity among the masses, drugged on the sidewalks of life, unaware of what is happening or what needs to be done. Fatima sighed briefly, a fleeting sadness crossing her face as she remembered her husband. "Who will tell Fathi that I am waiting for him? I ask the morning breeze for news of him, wondering if he still remembers me, if I still reside in his heart and thoughts." Fatima continued her inner monologue, occasionally glancing at the passing cars, dodging the splashes of water caused by the speeding wheels fleeing the increasing rain. She quickened her pace towards her home, unbothered by the wetness and undeterred by the long walk. Time no longer held any meaning for her other than to ensure that no more of life would be wasted. Fatima pulled the key to her house from her pocket, her cold hands fumbling to unlock the door, but the door was already open. She smiled as she pushed it open and entered the house, saying to herself, "Yes, it's Riyadh. How has time passed without me noticing?" The darkness was quickly closing in on the roads of Palestine, aided by the thick black clouds covering the rainy sky. It seemed as if night had already claimed the last ray of daylight as Fatima entered her home, blowing into her hands for warmth. Fatima put the key back in her coat pocket, but before she could pull her hand out, she felt a piece of paper she knew was there, a small piece with the phone number of Adel written on it. She took out the paper, eager to call her friend and tell her what had happened and about the new decision she had made. But the sound of her son Riyadh calling her from inside the house made her delay the call. Riyadh asked, "Mother, is that you?" He appeared at the door of his room, a handsome young man with his school bag still hanging on his shoulder. He looked at her and continued, "Where have you been? I was worried about you. I'm not used to coming home and not finding you here." Fatima returned the paper to her pocket and asked, "So, You just got home too? Is everything all right at your father's house? Yes. Is everything all right with you, mother? Thank God. I've never been better. Take off your bag and light the heater. I'll change my clothes, and then we'll go to the kitchen together to see what we can eat today. After that, I want to show you something important and have a long talk with you. Riyadh waited for his mother to speak during the meal, but she remained silent and calm. After finishing cleaning up the kitchen, she went to her room, then came back a little later with a small box made from greeting cards lined with crimson velvet. Riyadh remembered this box and how he had seen his mother making it when he was a child. She embroidered some words on it at times and decorated it with colorful beads at other times. He remembered that she had put some old photos, papers, and a small notebook inside it. Was that box still here in this house? Could it hold any secrets? All these questions swirled in Riyadh's mind as curiosity spurred him to the seat, pulling the heater with him. When he arrived, he smiled and said, "So, what's in this box? Is it candy?" Fatima smiled and said, "You know what's in this box. Some photos and papers. Come closer. Let's look at them together." Riyadh, sounding almost as if he were protesting, said, "Mother, they're just black and white photos. Where are the colors? These are really old, antique." Fatima sighed as she said, "Are they really that old? Then why do I feel like they were taken just yesterday? It seems I have grown old without even realizing it." Fatima began taking the photos out of the box, spreading them across the table in front of her as if she were looking for a specific one. When she found it, she held it and gazed at it for a long time before handing it to her son, saying, "Do you recognize this house?" Riyadh looked at the photo and said, "No. Which house is this? I've never seen it in my life. That house was my palace, and I was its pampered princess once. Of course, before the Jews demolished it. Oh my God. So this is my grandfather's demolished house? It really does look like a palace, mother." Fatima moved closer to her son, pointing with her finger here and there, explaining some hidden details in the photo. In her mind, the picture grew larger and larger, memories flooding her thoughts like a rushing river. Her emotions grew stronger, and Fatima could see clearly what lay behind the house, what was beside it. She could even smell the pine trees that surrounded it, and she could almost catch the butterflies fluttering around it on the summit of that distinctive hill on the long mountain, where the house proudly sat, gazing over the city like a king surveying his subjects. The city admired its splendor and loftiness, and it took pride in its majesty, for it was part of its land and one of its beautiful, distinguished buildings. Fatima could hear the clamor of her sisters all around her, as if she had been transported back to the past. Her mother's voice called out to her, "Fatima, Fatima." A small girl, with a colorful butterfly perched on her braid tied with a red ribbon, ran towards her mother with synchronized small steps. "Yes, mother." "Fatima, I need you to call your father quickly. He's downstairs." "Okay." Fatima cheerfully ran with those small, synchronized steps towards the door of the upper floor. She stepped outside and descended the 16 steps designed to extend outward from the house, overlooking the flower-filled garden, leading to a small path that would take her to the first floor. Fatima paused, placing one hand on the ornate iron railing that her father had told her he added specifically to protect her from falling. With her other hand, she grabbed the edge of her dress, spreading it beside her. She lifted her chin slightly and began descending the stairs slowly and gracefully, thinking to herself, "This is how princesses descend." When she reached the 16th step, she ran towards her father and said, "Daddy, Daddy, mother is calling for you right away." Abu Zahir lifted his little daughter into the air, playfully teasing her. "The queen is summoning me. How terrifying. I will appear before her soon. Would Her Royal Highness, Princess Fatima, kindly inform her of this?" "All right, Daddy." Fatima's legs never knew fatigue. Her greatest joy was in climbing or descending those stairs. She ran out from the first floor and as soon as she reached the steps, she would hold the edge of her dress with a delicate, childlike movement, spread it out beside her, lift her chin slightly, place her other hand on the stair railing, and ascend slowly, as if she were following an accompanying musical rhythm. Once she finished the stairs, she would resume her playful running around her palace, her father's home. To Fatima, the world was nothing but a beautiful doll, one she could color in her favorite hues and live each day as she pleased. She adored the sunrise and watched it eagerly, wondering how people could sleep away those beautiful morning hours at the beginning of the day, lost to slumber. Nothing bothered Fatima as much as talk of war. She would overhear her mother saying to her father, "They called it a setback, not even a war. They aren't bothered by what brings them shame and disgrace. I heard they called it the 6-Day War. 6 days. My God, we used to marvel at the 100 Years' War. But truly, the 6-Day War is even more astonishing. It's like a handover, the fastest in human history. Please, dear, we have no say in what happened. Let us be grateful that we managed to return to our home, that our children are happy with us, and we need nothing more. What are you afraid of? You know what frightens me? Please, my dear, let's not bring misery to our children or ruin to our home." Fatima did not understand the meaning of what was being said and found no reason to fear the conversations she overheard. Yet she also couldn't explain the unease they caused her. Often, she would jump onto her father's lap and ask, "Is there going to be another war, Daddy? Will the Jews kill us?" "No, my dear, don't say that." "Then, will they take our home?" "No. Why do you say such a thing? They've taken many houses and lands, like Auntie's house, haven't they?" Looking into his daughter's eyes, Abu Zahir replied with firm reassurance, "But they won't be able to take our palace. I promise you that, my princess." That look and that promise meant everything to Fatima. In her eyes, her father was stronger than those invading armies, and his word was truer than all the hollow promises made by various governments. This faith allowed Fatima to enjoy her pure childhood without fear. Her father's attentiveness to the news broadcasts, the gatherings of neighbors at their home to listen intently to President Nasser's speeches, meant nothing more to her than manly behaviors disconnected from reality. Her father's absences from home, his time spent helping others here or there, or taking someone to the hospital in his car or searching for their relatives, were just more admirable qualities befitting her kingly father. Fatima gave no thought to something called occupation. Life around Fatima began to change more and more rapidly. New families arrived in UNRWA vehicles to live in the homes of neighbors who could not return. She saw her small school merged with other schools to become one large school, also run by UNRWA. The phrase "ration card" started echoing in her ears frequently. Everything was tied to it, even her notebooks and pens, her blue primary school uniform, and the milk she was required to drink every morning at school. Many other things, too, yet Fatima never complained. To her, it was all still appealing. For now, the colors she could use in school had no match in all of Ramallah. The illustrated notebooks she received in art classes, the colorful clay, everything seemed like a bonus for attending the UNRWA School for Girls. That was the name of the large school built to the latest designs at the entrance to the Amari camp, with a similar boys' school built at the other end of the camp as well. The days flew by swiftly, slipping through the fingers of time, turning into years of academic excellence for Fatima, years of displacement and hardship for the homes crowded like boxes on the land of the camp, and years of patience for many of her classmates who lived in the camp. As sensitive as Fatima was, and as much as she felt her classmates suffering, they adored her and competed to earn her friendship. Little did she know that despite all of this, she had yet to experience the true betrayal of time. Her dream still lingered with her. Every morning, her sisters took care of her clothing, combed her hair, prepared her satchel, and ensured she arrived safely at school. Even though she was no longer the youngest member of the family, there was her sister Haneen and her brother Ali, who had been born just 2 months earlier, and they were a good reason for her to return home quickly every day. Fatima was in her 5th grade when the school bell rang. The students quickly gathered their books, paying no heed to the final words the teacher was saying to conclude the lesson. They began crowding at the school gate, eager to leave. Fatima searched her pocket for her allowance. She wanted to buy sweets for her sister Haneen. Fatima would never forget to lift her chin slightly, planting her steps firmly on the ground, and beginning to walk with grace and lightness, as if every breeze that touched her lovely face was greeting her. She neither hurried to leave nor lingered too long. Instead, she glanced right and left, playfully teasing anyone she passed, especially the younger students who often needed help leaving the school amidst the crowded scene. Fatima was the one who made way for them, guiding them through the narrow gate that opened towards the camp. Fatima was happy as she approached her home, the palace she loved to return to with energy. She looked forward to offering her sister Haneen some sweets and teaching her whatever playful gestures or words would fill the house with joy. There was nothing more delightful than watching a child do or say something for the first time. Little did she know that this day would reveal to her a new face of the world that she had not yet encountered. Fatima opened the door and entered the large glassed-in porch. She turned towards her mother, who was sitting by the window, and greeted her. But her mother didn't respond, as if she hadn't heard her. Fatima wanted to approach her mother and ask her what was happening, but Haneen's loud crying filled the house, and her mother didn't move towards her little one. Fatima hurried to Haneen, dropping her school bag by the bed. She carefully lifted her sister into her arms, soothing her with gentle words and playful sounds. She pulled out some sweets from her pocket and then walked towards her mother, asking, "What's wrong, Mama? Has something bad happened?" Her mother looked at Fatima briefly before turning her gaze back to the window, as if waiting for something important to appear from there. She remained silent, signaling with her hand for Fatima to be quiet. No questions allowed. Fatima noticed her mother rubbing her hands together, then pressing her forehead, and at times clutching her chest as if on the verge of tears. But she would regain control, hold her breath for a moment, wipe her face with her hands, sigh, and return to staring silently out the window. Fatima took Haneen and retreated to the girls' room, which was designated for her and her sisters. She played with Haneen, using their toys, but all her senses were attuned to her mother. She didn't know what had happened, but her heart told her that something terrible had occurred, something too difficult for her mother to share. Suddenly, Fatima heard some noise in the porch. The sounds grew louder and clearer, and then her mother's crying became unmistakable. Fatima left Haneen among the toys and rushed towards the porch to see what was happening. Her 2 older sisters, Najla and Zainab, had returned from school, and they were now trying to comfort their mother. Najla was asking, "Do you know where they took him?" "Where else would they take him?" "To prison, of course." At that moment, Zahir opened the door and entered. He was startled by the sight of his mother and sisters crying. He asked, "What happened?" His mother, overwhelmed, replied, "Your father, the Israeli army patrols came and arrested him. They took him away." "Where did they take him?" "Oh, my dear, don't you understand? How many times have I told him, 'Your children, don't let them pay the price.' And now look at you." "Mom, where did they take him?" "To prison." "To prison? And how do you know that?" "Oh, Zahir, don't worry. They just took him for a stroll." Then, Zahir started to cry, overwhelmed and unable to process what was happening around him. He was only 14 years old, too young to grasp anything except his fear. His mind was filled with blurred, overlapping images, and the only clear picture was that of his mother and sisters crying. Zahir's mother noticed what was happening to her children, the effect of her own fear and tears on them. She wiped her tears away and raised her voice, saying, "All right, that's enough. No more crying. No more tears and wailing. Come here, all of you." She gathered her children in her arms, trying to muster strength, and said, There's no doubt that we will face difficult times from now on. I don't know where this will lead us, but what do you say we make a pact with each other? A promise we all swear to." The girls looked at their mother in confusion, and Zahir asked, "What kind of promise?" "A promise that we will try, as much as possible, to reject crying and lamentation. We will help each other get through the tough times, no matter how hard they get. We will bear with one another, encourage each other, and deal with any problem between us with patience and understanding." "Mom, what's going to happen to us?" "No matter what happens to us, Zahir, will you promise me that you'll do as I just said? Nothing can break us as long as we are together." "Yes, Mom, I promise you." "And you too." "Yes, I promise." "I promise too." At that moment, Fatima emerged from the corner of the door, joining her mother and sisters. She said, "I promise too." Zahir's mother, trying to lighten the mood with a joke, said, "Look, it's Fatima, the princess of this palace, joining us in our promise. So, don't be afraid." But the joke didn't have the desired effect on the family. Everyone was about to cry again, but they quickly remembered the promise they had just made. Each of them pretended to be busy with something around them. Some picked up their bags and left. Others searched their pockets for a handkerchief to wipe their faces. And so it was. Zahir's mother stroked Fatima's head, affectionately saying, "My little one, can I entrust you with something?" "What is it, Mama?" "I know how much you love Haneen and how much she depends on you. Could you stay close to her during this time?" "Of course, Mama." From that moment on, Fatima knew that she no longer had her older siblings to care for and protect her. Instead, there were new responsibilities in this new reality, requiring her to relinquish her princess-like status, perhaps forever. The hours passed slowly, as if time itself was exhausted. Zahir's mother grew impatient, and the girls struggled to maintain their strong facade, pretending to be brave and steadfast. Zahir remained seated next to his mother, his gaze fixed on the road, certain that at any moment he would see his father returning home. He wanted to be the first to tell his mother the good news. But nothing happened. The night arrived, slowly isolating the earth from sight, tightening its grip on the last ray of sunlight until it hid it behind its dark cloak. People began to retire to their beds, eyes closed, and dreams descended upon the earth. But none of those dreams visited Abu Zahir's household, for none of the family's eyes closed that night. Each member feared the coming day, dreading its surprises while clinging to the serenity of the past, hoping it would return. The night continued, a struggle between insomnia and fear, until the sun rose again, spreading its golden blanket across the horizon. As soon as the night fled from its confrontation with the daylight, Zahir made up her mind. She dressed quickly and rushed to her eldest daughter Najla, whispering a few instructions before leaving the house. She headed straight to her only brother's home in Jerusalem, seeking his help. The sisters' gazes toward Fatima had changed. They no longer held the same love and affection. Instead, they reminded her of her oath to her mother and her promise to bear the responsibility for herself and for Haneen as much as she could. Fatima was beginning to get used to a new kind of treatment. It was the first day her mother had left the house while her father was also absent. It was also the first day Fatima had missed school. It seemed she would have to get used to that too, as it wouldn't be the last. Days passed with Fatima missing school and her mother absent from the home, visiting various lawyers or searching for someone influential who could provide information about her husband or his whereabouts. 10 days had gone by in this manner, and news of Abu Zahir's imprisonment had spread throughout the city. Neighbors began offering help, inquiring about the family's situation, and often sending food. The girls found it difficult to accept the aid, while Zahir burned with the need to find a way to help her husband. She had become accustomed to sitting at the window at night, gazing down the road with her infant son, Ali, on her lap. She would nurse him with whatever she could find within her, and if his crying grew louder, she would pass him to Najla to make him some formula. During those 10 days, Najla had crafted a swing for her brother using ropes stretched from one window to another in her mother's room. She would rock him in it for a short while until he fell into a deep sleep, giving her time to attend to other tasks. But that night, Zahir wanted to keep him in her lap after he had finished his bottle of milk. She wrapped him in a warm woolen blanket and continued to stare at the road. Suddenly, Zahir's limbs trembled as she saw some cars approaching her home. She stood near the door to get a better look, not wanting to expose Ali to the biting cold outside. As she strained to listen, she began to distinguish the sounds of high-pitched radio chatter and the hurried footsteps of Israeli soldiers disembarking from their vehicles. One of them held a large flashlight, stepping out quickly to illuminate the path for the drivers and assist them in surrounding the house. Sometimes he guided them with gestures, other times with shouts in a foreign language. The soldiers began to gather around the house with terrifying weapons. The door of the last car opened, and Zahir's eyes silently followed the events. Who could this man be, the one being pulled out so roughly, holding on to the remnants of his scattered dignity, still hoping to lift his head and see his family gazing at him with eyes thirsting to see him once more after what felt like an eternity? A strange shiver overtook Zahir, her body suddenly feeling as if it were engulfed in a fever, wrapping her in an uncomfortably rough cloak. She no longer knew what to do. It was Abu Zahir being dragged before her very eyes. He couldn't walk easily. One of his legs was severely injured, and it was clear he was forcing himself to bear the weight of his body between steps, defiantly challenging the pain that hadn't broken his dignity in front of his family. Zahir didn't know where she had found the strength that suddenly surged within her, or how the events unfolding around her had somehow lost their importance. She turned her gaze to her children and saw them silently crying as they watched their father through the glass window. At that moment, she realized that the young boy in her lap, the weeping daughters, and the teenage son rushing through his education in hopes of discovering the world, they were all on the brink of being lost if she didn't act. Calmly, she approached them and said, "Remember our oath, my soldiers. Don't let the enemy soldiers see your tears." She gently pulled her children away from the window one by one, saying, "We'll soon find out what's happening. Look, one of the soldiers is coming up the stairs." Zahir approached the door with determination and opened it. She spoke with a tone filled with courage and strength. "Don't let them see it as weakness." The children gathered their courage as they listened to the soldier, who spoke in Arabic. "We need the key to the basement." Zahir looked at Zahir and quietly asked him to retrieve the key. She then turned back to the soldier and asked, "What have you done to my husband?" "Nothing. He did this to himself." "Did he occupy your land?" "You all say the same thing, stupid Arabs. This is our land." Zahir's words had clearly provoked the startled soldier, who seemed ready to engage in a prolonged argument with her. But the commanding officer's sharp Hebrew commands silenced him, forcing him to snatch the key from Zahir's hand and return to the waiting military unit. It dawned on Zahir that her husband must have confessed to something, and now they had taken him to show them where he had hidden the weapons. She knew this was the right moment to talk to her children about what was happening. They had the right to know, given the situation, and they needed to be prepared for what was to come. Zahir gathered her thoughts and pulled her family into a room far from the balcony and the windows overlooking the yard. She began reminding them of the war, of what they had endured, and what they still remembered, the suffering, the migration to Jordan, until she said, "That's why your father decided to resist this occupation as much as he could. He stored some weapons in the house to give to the freedom fighters who carry out armed operations against Israel. It's a heroic act by your father, but it seems we will all be affected by its consequences. Why don't you become heroes like your father? Didn't you see how he was dragged out by the soldiers without losing his dignity?" Zahir struggled to find the right words as she spoke to her children, distracted by the sound of drilling and hammering coming from the basement, which weighed heavily on her heart, a burden she tried to conceal as best she could. Her words left a sense of pride in her children's hearts. They seemed better prepared for whatever might happen next. Nothing else mattered. They were the children of a hero. Zahir returned to the balcony, wanting to see what was happening. She noticed that the soldiers had begun loading the weapons they had found into their vehicles. The drilling and hammering had ceased, and Zahir thought the ordeal was finally over. Some of the Israeli army vehicles started leaving the area, and the radio chatter in Hebrew grew louder. The soldiers seemed to be coming and going as if something had puzzled them. Then they returned to pull Abu Zahir into one of the vehicles and drove off with him, leaving behind only 2 cars, which remained for an unknown purpose. Zahir's heart began to race as she saw one of the soldiers climbing the stairs toward the 2nd floor, where she and her children were. A whirlwind of questions swirled in her mind with no answers. What was happening? What did this soldier want from them? Why hadn't they all left as they had arrived? Zahir opened the door for the soldier and asked, "What do you want?" "I want you and the whole family to evacuate the house now." "Evacuate the house? Why?" "In fact, your husband buried many weapons in the ground of this house. But he would have killed you all with them. Why should we evacuate the house? Didn't you understand? The weapons. We need to get rid of some mines. Why should we evacuate the house?" Zahir's voice began to rise as if she were shouting at the soldier. "You've taken the weapons, so why do we have to evacuate the house now?" The soldiers noticed what was happening, and one of them rushed up the stairs as if to protect his comrade. "Peace be upon you, Zahir. Don't be afraid. We just need you to evacuate the house for a while, and then you can return." "But why?" "Your husband buried 3 mines under your house's ground. The moisture has affected them, and now they've become dangerous mines, about to explode. We need to detonate them here beside the house, but we're afraid the explosion might harm you. You speak Arabic fluently. I am an Arab Jew from Yemen." Zahir turned her back to the soldier, feeling a pang of jealousy over the word Arab. What was this Arab Jew? She dismissed what she had heard and began gathering her family, dressing them in heavy clothes to take them out into the street as they were ordered. The voice of that Arab Jew still echoed from time to time. "Open the windows of the house before you leave." Although she didn't know why, she opened the windows, gathered her children, and led them out into the street. This time, Fatima didn't clutch the edge of her dress, nor did she raise her chin as she descended the stairs. She no longer remembered how to walk like a princess. She couldn't tell if it was fear causing the violent trembling in her small body, or if it was the cold. Nothing in the world mattered anymore except for her mother and what her mother commanded. Her life now revolved around this strong mother. The soldiers didn't allow the family to stand near the house. Instead, they insisted on moving them a distance away, claiming it was safe and ordering them to sit on the ground, wet from the scattered rain. The hour approached midnight. One of the soldiers approached Zahir, who was pressing close to his mother with his siblings for warmth, and pulled him away forcefully, saying, "You, come with us." Zahir shouted, "Where to?" "Don't be afraid. I'll bring him back." Zahir was about to push the younger children off her lap and run after the soldier to get Zahir back, but her infant clung to her breast from under his blanket, nursing on her grief and pain. The innocent faces of her children, seeking strength from her, made her stay silent. It was as if the silence she swallowed down became embers burning in her heart. The cold rain beneath her could no longer reach her body, and the downpour over her head felt like the tears of the sky comforting the silent tears slipping down her cheeks, like a prisoner who had been imprisoned for so long that he fled without attracting attention. The Israeli soldiers had decided that none of them should carry a dangerous mine that could explode in their hands. Their blood was too precious to be spilled for the sake of detonating a mine. They needed to find someone suitable for this mission, someone to try his luck with the mines and test whether he still had time left in his life. And they found no one more suitable than Zahir, the 14-year-old boy whose feet were just stepping into the doors of promising youth, doors adorned with bright dreams, visions bathed in the melodies of hope. Those melodies made the blood of youth boil in their veins, driving them toward adventures, risks, and recklessness. Zahir had not yet experienced crossing those thresholds, but as the soldier pulled him by the shoulder, he felt something new growing inside him. It was a refusal to be treated this way, even if the other was a heavily armed soldier. His anger and resentment towards the soldiers felt like a genie that had emerged from a forgotten lamp, one he had never tried to use and had covered with a halo of calm emotions over the years. Now he could no longer control it. He saw his own image beside that of his father, who had also been dragged from the car to the basement a short while ago. His resolve grew stronger to do something that would make the soldier, in some way, receive his due for what he had done. Despite Zahir's repeated attempts to free his shoulder from the soldier's grip, by pushing it away sometimes and by sudden twists at other times, the soldier continued to drag him until he reached his comrades on the ground floor of the house. The soldier's strange words seemed to convey, "I have done what was required of me and brought you this. Put whatever you want." The soldier, who identified himself as an Arab Jew, turned to Zahir and said in a stern tone, "Carry this mine and take it to that rock at the end of your orchard, place it underneath, and then return quickly. We will light the way with this lantern, and I warn you not to drop or fall with the mine, or it will explode. Do you understand?" Zahir remained silent, staring into the soldier's eyes as if he could not believe what he had heard. Then he bent down to pick up the mine silently and stood facing the soldiers, as if he wanted to say, "What if I threw it now and detonated it with you?" Zahir saw the terror in the soldiers' eyes as they shouted and urged him to hurry away with the mine from their vicinity. Zahir walked out, holding the mine in his hands, treading on the rain-soaked ground that pounded his head and seeped from his shirt collar to his chest. His steps became difficult and slippery, and his thoughts clarified in his mind. His feelings matured in his chest until he realized in those moments that he and his family were at the mercy of that group of soldiers, and that he meant nothing to them whether the mine exploded with him or if he returned safely. The rebellious emotions within him were nothing but his father's feelings when he decided to participate in resisting the occupation and forgot about the family and home. Zahir's desire to run back to the soldiers with this mine and throw it in their faces was strong, even if it meant his life and his family's home. But the look his mother gave him as he was pulled from her lap moments ago, and the promise he had made to her and his siblings that day made the task easier for him. He placed the mine under the rock and returned running like a lost child who had just spotted his mother. He did not stop running until he was back beside his eagerly waiting mother. Before him, Zahir could ask her son what was happening. A loud explosion echoed, scattering some stones here and there, and the ground lit up with a strange light for a moment, then extinguished. As Zahir turned to calm her children and reassure their hearts so they could return to their tranquility, the soldier had already come back, pulling Zahir again towards the house. This time, Zahir looked at him with a new gaze, one devoid of questions or concern about objections. Instead, it was filled with a masculinity that frightened the soldier, making him lift his hand off Zahir and walk beside him without dragging or shouting at him. Zahir entered the ground floor, approached the second mine calmly, and then turned to the soldier and asked, "Are you ready? Should I go out now?" "Yes, yes, go out, Zahir." Zahir carried the second mine and walked with steady, brave steps, placing it under the rock that had lost much of its size. Then he returned towards his mother with a nonchalant gait. When he reached her, he heard the explosion filling the night sky with its roar, startling people and disturbing their sleep. Zahir retraced his steps, knowing he was being followed by that soldier, and did with the third mine what he had done with the other two. He returned this time to his mother and sisters, and with a steady and strong voice said, "Come out of the cold, it's over." The soldiers gathered their equipment, returned their weapons, and extinguished their lantern. They assembled in the two waiting cars to begin leaving Zahir's land. None of them thought that on this bleak night they had planted in this land hatred and defiance that would create men who would remain unconquerable, no matter how long the darkness of oppression lasted. The soldiers gathered their equipment, returned their weapons, and extinguished their lantern. They assembled in the two waiting cars to begin leaving Zahir's land. None of them thought that on this bleak night they had planted in this land hatred and defiance that would create men who would remain unconquerable, no matter how long the darkness of oppression lasted. Fatima remained awake through those few hours of the night, battling between feelings of fear and bravery. She found nothing but tears and hiding her face under her blanket to avoid her mother's occasional worried glances. She no longer saw the sunrise she once loved as a rebellion of the day against the night, with the sun's rays chasing away any remaining darkness, even if it were in an alley of the old Jerusalem that had once loved to spend its day in. Fatima loved those alleys and envied their residents. She saw them as a great place for playing and hiding from friends whenever she visited her uncle. But despite this, and although she heard her mother repeatedly advising them because she would go to their uncle's place at dawn, she could not ask to be taken along. The temptation of playing no longer enticed her more than caring for the little Haneen as she had promised. Zahir stood on her house's balcony early in the morning, waiting for the rain to stop so she could head to the road and take a car to Jerusalem to see her brother. But she heard the sound of a car stopping in front of the house and quickly moved to the window with caution, not wanting to wake any of her children who had just fallen asleep at dawn. Zahir was greatly surprised to find that the visitor was none other than the mayor of Birzeit, Abdosala. Zahir hurried to the door, pulling a scarf she had placed on her head. Abdosala rang the bell. Zahir quickly adjusted her scarf and opened the door, saying, "Welcome, welcome. Good morning, my sister. Good morning. Please come in." The mayor took a few steps into the balcony and then sat on the first chair he encountered, speaking in a hurried tone to finish his business, his eyes never leaving the ground, out of shyness and modesty. "I won't take up much of your time, my sister. The truth is, I couldn't sleep last night. The sounds of explosions were echoing everywhere, and I thought they had blown up your house. God forbid. Actually, I drove my car to the opposite mountain and tried to survey your house with my car lights. I did not leave until I was certain it had not been blown up yet, which is why I am here now." Abdosala swallowed and continued, "Listen, my sister, I have thought a lot about how to help you, and I found that I could send municipal cars and workers to carry as much of your furniture as possible to the municipal warehouses. That way, if, God forbid, they decide to blow up the house, we will have saved the furniture. If they do not blow it up, we will return it to you and arrange it as you instruct." Zahir pondered for a moment and then said, "Do you think they will blow up the house?" "Honestly, my sister, I have not heard of a case where they found weapons in a house and did not blow it up. I learned that they found a lot of weapons in your home." "That is true. Then, do what you think is best. When do you want to move the furniture? Today? Now? Before the army returns? And will the army return? I don't know. But I will be in danger if they find out. Oh God, do what you think is appropriate. Say, nothing will befall us except what God has written for us. We put our trust in God." Abdosala rose from his chair and quickly made his way to the door, hurrying off towards the municipality, leaving Zahir rooted to the spot. Her eyes remained fixed on the door she had just closed behind him, as if she were trying to process what the mayor had said. Everything in her body seemed frozen except for her thoughts racing through her mind, with no clear direction. She could only hear the phrase, "So it's demolition then," echoing between her mind and heart, neither her mind knowing what to do nor her heart knowing what to feel. In those moments, there was no pressing desire as strong as the wish to stop time and return to the past. But there was no way to achieve any of that. Zahir had to catch her breath with difficulty, as if a mountain was resting on her chest and had shifted slightly, allowing her some air. She went to wake her children and inform them about the day's task of storing the furniture. In just a few minutes, Municipal workers began loading whatever they could into the municipal trucks with speed and confusion. Everyone was eager to complete the job without being questioned by the army. Zahir was bewildered by how the neighbors had gathered around her, each one wanting to help. Everyone carried what they could to the trucks, and most of them joined the workers in returning to the municipal warehouses to help unload the furniture. The work seemed like a well-trained, organized ant colony completing the task as quickly as possible. The cars left the site without encountering any patrols. Zahir found herself in a sorrowful house, mourning the loss of its furniture, with only some bedding left in a corner for them to sleep on during the coming dark nights. The darkness of winter and the darkness of oppression and suffering. Some workers even took wooden doors and windows they managed to pry off, and the sinks were also taken for storage, ensuring that as much of the house as possible was preserved. Zahir didn't know why she hurried out of the house to seek help from her brother. Was she escaping from the sight of the cold, tomb-like house? Or was she trying to avoid her children's looks and questions? Or perhaps she was running toward the road in an attempt to flee from the whole situation, as she could no longer bear what was happening or continue playing the role of the strong mother. Fatima was accustomed to sitting by her mother's window, waiting for her return after her repeated, forced departures with her uncle to deal with legal matters. Abu Zahir's whereabouts were unknown, and the threat of the house being blown up loomed over them, bringing with it the stick of homelessness and loss. The costs of lawyers necessitated another trip for Zahir to sell some of her jewelry. Every time Fatima heard from her mother that the lawyers had promised not to blow up the house, a sense of anxious joy seeped into her. She would say to herself, "Yes, they won't blow up our house. My father promised me that he wouldn't allow the Jews to touch our home. He endured everything and sacrificed himself to keep his promise." Fatima often took pride in her father, repeating those phrases to the family and assuring them that demolition would not happen. News of the house being emptied of its furniture spread everywhere, becoming a topic of conversation among people and schools. Food baskets began arriving at Zahir's house, brought by familiar faces to the family sometimes and by strangers other times. Whether the family accepted the help or refused, food and fruit were left on the kitchen floor, hoping someone would reach out for them. Zahir had abandoned the house, which was filled with women throughout the day. He had also left school, finding no space in himself for it. He started getting used to sitting by the rock that had endured the night of the explosions, which had lost almost half its weight. He would only enter the house when his mother returned or when all the visitors had left, indifferent to the cold or the rain, which was starting to feel a bit warmer as it signaled the end of winter. On a Friday in mid-March of that first year of the 70s, the family, as usual, took care of the children and cleaned and organized the house. Zahir had left with her brother to meet with the appointed lawyer, who had promised to contact her husband by any means and update her on his news. An Israeli patrol headed toward the house, and one of its soldiers jumped to the door, banging it loudly. Nujla opened the door, and the soldier entered the house without permission, beginning to inspect the balcony before moving to the adjacent room, asking, "Where is your mother?" "She isn't here." The soldier noticed the empty rooms and asked, "Where's the furniture?" "What furniture? This is our furniture." In a voice filled with anger and hatred, the soldier shouted, "When did you move the furniture? Where to?" Nujla remained silent, so the soldier yelled at her, "Return the furniture to the house immediately. Do you understand?" He then began speaking through his radio in a strange language to his colleagues, before looking at Nujla as he left the house and repeating his order, "Return the furniture, we will not blow up the house." Fatima clapped and jumped for joy, saying, "Did you hear? They won't blow up the house." Zainab asked, "Then why did he come? Do you think he estimates the space?" Fatima cried out in alarm, "Be quiet. Don't say that. He said they won't blow it up." Nujla felt sympathy for the frightened Fatima, embraced her tenderly, and stroked her hair, saying, "Calm down, my dear. Don't be afraid. Remember the promise we made to our mother." Then she fell silent, and a voice inside her continued to scream, "Where are you, mother? Where are you?" No one among the neighbors noticed what had happened. For most, Friday was a day of rest and late sleeping. For the occupying soldiers, it was their anticipated day. The period between the soldier's departure and his return with a large force in several vehicles to besiege the house again was only 2 hours or less. Some vehicles even went to neighboring houses asking them to leave and open their windows. Fatima nearly lost consciousness as she heard the unpleasant sounds of advancing army vehicles, the incessant shouting of the radio in its foreign language, and the harsh clatter of soldiers' boots, which added another unpleasant sound to the mix, striking the holy ground with feet bearing only arrogance, bragging, and destruction. The girls watched in horror as Zahir faced the soldier's weapon with his chest while opening the door and shouting, "What's going on? What do you want?" The soldiers poured into the house and scattered throughout its rooms, shouting, "Clear the house. You have 15 minutes to leave and take your things." Zainab cried, "Will you blow it up?" "Yes. But my mother isn't here." "Wait for my mother. Time is passing. Empty the house." The soldiers began planting dynamite in the corners of the house, and the girls started shouting in panic, not knowing what to do, and ignoring the need to remove the bedding from the house. The soldiers continued to shout in their faces, "Get out of the house." The 15 minutes passed like 15 seconds of the bitterest experience the world can offer its inhabitants. The soldiers started pulling the girls outside and pushing Zahir away after he tried to attack the door of the house and cling to it. The soldiers got into their vehicles and began clearing the area, chasing the children away as far as possible from the house. Nujla looked around and saw that the neighbors had also left their homes. They began to help her and her sisters towards a safe area that the soldiers had allowed them to stay in. For a moment, she noticed her sisters being pulled in different directions by the neighbors, and she realized she needed to keep track of what was happening. She gathered her siblings around her so none of them would get lost from her sight and started to muster her strength, asking, "Where is Zainab? Where is Fatima? Where is Haneen? Where is Ali?" For a moment, Nujla thought she had gathered the family, only for Fatima to shout, "Ali is not with us." Nujla cried out, "Zainab, where is Ali? Oh God, he's asleep in the swing." Nujla was overwhelmed by panic and began to scream and throw herself at the army vehicles, trying to pass through to get Ali out. But wherever she turned, the vehicles maneuvered to block her passage as she continued to scream, "My brother! I want my brother. He is in the house." None of the soldiers seemed to understand her. She believed she could save her brother at any cost. When she realized they didn't understand her, she started shouting in English, "Baby! Baby!" One of the soldiers tried to confirm, shouting, "Baby!" She cried, pointing towards the house, tears streaming down her face. "Baby! I want my brother, he's a baby. Look at your house. It's very beautiful. You can see it from anywhere in this city." Abu Zahir raised his eyes towards his house and felt as if his heart had been taken from him and migrated to that beloved spot. He was unaware of what was happening, unable to imagine that tanks were driving his daughters away from the house, each of them searching for her sister without finding her, while Zahir tried to find them in vain. The situation was only made worse by the even more horrific event. After everyone was about 300 meters away, the sound of 3 consecutive explosions echoed like the earth's pain revealing itself to the sky, bearing witness to the injustice and tyranny. Everyone looked towards the house, and it was astonishing to see the house slowly kneel on its knees before collapsing to the ground like a noble martyr, silent and uncomplaining. None of the crowd saw any stones flying or any glass shattering. The explosion's sound reached the ears of those far and near, striking Abu Zahir's ears like a guided Israeli missile. Abu Zahir jumped in his chair, seeing his house collapsing before his eyes, and began to struggle to free himself and resist his situation in vain. He thought of suicide and jumping from the prison roof with his chair, but the chair was also bolted to the roof. Abu Zahir felt as if something inside him had broken, swearing he heard the sound of it breaking. His strength crumbled, and he sat in his chair as if fainting, hearing the soldiers repeat, "This is a lesson for you. Learn your lesson." As for Zahir, who was traveling from Jerusalem to Ramallah to buy some underwear for her husband as requested by the lawyer to send to him according to his claim, she looked as she passed through the main street towards her house, which she was used to seeing from there, and found it was gone. Zahir panicked in her seat and shouted at the driver, "Stop, stop! They have demolished my house." Zahir left the car and began to climb the road leading to her house, with only one question on her mind. Where are my children? What have they done without me? I want my children. The house began to come into view little by little. She didn't know whether to stand in front of it and mourn it or turn her gaze away because her children were more important than it. Zahir started to steal glances at the ruins, seeing the debris piled on top of one another as if it were accusing her for not being present at the moment of parting, the moment of execution for that house. Tears began to fall from Zahir's cheeks despite all her claims of strength, and her chin trembled violently as she found no words to utter. When she noticed the crowd starting to disperse at the end of the road after the army had left the site, she quickly moved towards them, searching for her children. Fatima began to notice the crowd dispersing around her, the congestion in front of her slowly diminishing. Gathering her remaining strength, she got up from the pavement and began searching for her sisters. She had to find them now, but she was surprised by a woman looking at her and saying, "You are Abu Zahir's daughter?" "Yes, you are his daughter. Here is your sister." Fatima found nothing but her sister Haneen being thrown into her lap like stolen treasures tossed away when a thief flees, preferring to save himself. It seemed to Fatima as though the woman had fled before anyone could blame her for her action. She thought for a moment that someone would see her and help her, but no one looked her way. She then understood that her young age made her unworthy of the compliments and help that her mother and sisters received. Fatima carried her crying sister and turned, not knowing where to go, as everyone was heading to their homes. But she no longer had a home. Fatima's feeling of nausea increased, and she felt she might drop her sister. She hurried to a nearby wall of a house and sat Haneen down while still holding her. She began to involuntarily vomit the contents of her stomach, and Haneen almost slipped from her hands if not for the two other hands that reached out and held her. It no longer mattered to Fatima, who held her sister, as much as it mattered to get through her nausea. She was sweating cold, and her nose and eyes were running. She desperately needed the handkerchief that was extended to her to wipe her face, and she heard the owner of the handkerchief say, "Sit down on the curb for a moment, take a little rest, and don't worry about your sister." Fatima looked up wearily at the speaker and saw a young man about Zahir's age asking her, "Do you need water? I can get it for you from this house." "No, thank you. Are you okay now?" "I think so. Then I'll take you to your mother." Fatima didn't understand why she started crying again as she asked, "Is my mother here? Take me to my mother." The young man carried the little girl Haneen in his arms and took Fatima's hand to help her get up and walk with him towards her mother, saying, "Your family is at Kader's house. Do you know it?" "Yes. It's our neighbor in this direction." Fatima walked with tired steps, hurrying to join her family members. The young man led her with a few steps ahead until they reached Kader's house. Fatima saw that some women had returned to gather in front of this house to find out the latest news about this afflicted family. At that moment, the young man said, "Can you take your sister from me now? The women will help you. I will leave." Fatima took her sister while looking towards the women, searching for her mother. She did not glance at the young man to thank him or see where he had gone. She began to move towards the women, not hoping for any help from them. All she wanted was to see a family member. She was saved by Zahir's voice coming from a distance, saying, "Fatima, where have you been? Give me Haneen. I've searched for you for so long and couldn't find you." Fatima resumed crying, feeling some relief upon seeing her brother, and said, Where is our mother? Mom is here. But Fatima looked at her brother, unsure of what this word meant. Zahir continued, Come, let's sit here for a moment. He took her hand and led her to some small steps at the edge of a well near Mkader's house, saying, Listen, Fatima, Mom got sick and fainted when she went looking for us and couldn't find us easily, especially since she hasn't found you yet. Zahir continued as if to reassure Fatima. Dr. Gosha, our father's friend, came to treat her, and he is with her now at Mkader's house. So, hasn't she been reassured about our mother yet? On the contrary, the doctor told me that when Mom saw the house being demolished, her blood pressure rose significantly, and he gave her a sedative injection to make her sleep a little. And he won't leave her until she wakes up and he sees her with his own eyes. And I want to see her. You will see her, but you need to understand something, my dear. Mkader's house is not our home, and we can't come and go as we please. We must be strong as we promised our mother and help each other until we are reunited again. Where will we reunite? Zahir swallowed and pretended to play with the little Haneen, saying, God will arrange something for us, so don't be afraid. Zahir's words were like a balm to Fatima's heart. Despite the walls and the crowd that separated her from her mother, she felt she was with her and no longer lost. She could feel the presence of her family, even without the walls that once united them. A moment of silence fell between the siblings. Then Fatima tapped her fingers on her brother's leg and asked, Isn't that my uncle over there? Yes. Why are all these men around him? They are trying to find us an alternative home in this area. They are looking for a house for us? Fatima said this with great sorrow. Then she bowed her head, directing her eyes towards the ground, as if struck by a great disappointment. A part of her still hoped that all that had happened was just a nightmare that had passed and ended. Zahir carried his little sister Haneen and left Fatima, saying, I'll try to get her to Nujla inside. Then I'll see what's going on with my uncle. Fatima nodded, as if she understood that he had to leave her alone here again. She continued to watch people coming and going without paying attention to her, while her dear uncle seemed to be thanking God that she was sitting there quietly, unmoving. He glanced at her from time to time, then got busy talking with the men, going with them, and returning with others. The night began to reclaim its authority over the land, capturing every remaining ray of sunlight fleeing towards the horizon. Only a few minutes remained before darkness would envelop the place. Fatima still sat outside, wishing her Lord would quickly end this harsh day. The cold began to nip at her small body, hunger struck her stomach painfully, and sadness gradually ate away at her warm childish feelings. Her heartbeats quickened, and for the first time, real fear managed to creep into her troubled heart, stirring all her conflicting emotions. It seemed to her that if she continued sitting there, no one would miss her no matter how much time passed. A strange feeling overcame her, as if she had been demolished like the beloved house, abandoned like it, and that she would suffer the same fate. Fatima carried her sorrow for herself, her home, and her family as she slowly moved away from Mkader's house and knocked on the door. The scene inside was familiar. Everything was as it was. The bedding on the floor, trays of food from 100 neighbors filling the space, and the sisters huddled at their mother's feet, caring for Ali and Haneen. Pitying looks filled the eyes of those present, and the only phrase Fatima heard from her neighbors was, "Come and eat, we've prepared food for you." So, food is still the most important thing for people. Fatima thought to herself as she approached her sisters shyly and whispered in Nujla's ear, "Where can I clean myself?" Nujla asked permission from the attendees and took Fatima to the house's bathroom, where she started washing her hands and face while crying. Then, she suddenly pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly against her chest and said, "I was so worried about you. If Zahir hadn't told us you were sitting outside. Forgive me, I couldn't leave Mom and come to you, and I couldn't call you. This isn't our home." The two sisters desperately needed that strong hug and the bitter tears that wrung their beings with pain. Once Nujla was done, She washed her sister's face again, splashing some water on her face, as if she were applying powder to conceal the traces of the burning tears that had scorched her cheeks with harshness. Fatima returned to sit with her sisters by their mother. She found that Mkader had added some bedding for them, so she took the opportunity and buried herself in the bedding, wanting to see or hear nothing except that beloved voice calling near the door for Nujla and Nujla's voice requesting permission to respond to her brother and see what he wanted. Fatima peeked her small head from under the cover, feeling Nujla returning to sit next to her, and asked, "What did Zahir want?" "He wanted to stay with a friend. He didn't want to be among all these women. I wish he had taken me with him." "Well, Fatima, try to sleep. I promise you that tomorrow night we'll all be together, God willing." These words might have comforted Fatima before today. However, having seen that promises are not always kept, she sighed with regret, buried her head under her cover, and slept despite the hunger and cold that persistently woke her several times during the night, forcing her to rise from her bed with dawn. What mattered to Fatima was that this dawn was the dawn of another day, and that what would happen would not be as harsh as what happened yesterday. Fatima did not realize that her mother was also awake beside her, and that Nujla and Zainab were looking at each other quietly, afraid of disturbing the sleeping family. In reality, the only person asleep was Ali. Fatima did not know how long this situation lasted, but she knew she was waiting for any event that would allow her to get up from her bed and leave the house quickly. It didn't occur to her that this event would be the sound of her father's car horn calling them. Fatima lifted her head and shouted, "Dad's car!" She found that the family had jumped from their beds. Everyone had heard the sound and was delighted. For the first time, everyone was smiling. Zahir got up from her bed and looked out the window to see that her brother had become active. He had not wasted the morning hours in sleep or laziness, but had brought Zahir's car and come with a serious matter. Mkader had approached the door to open it for the arriving uncle with news, saying, "Come, Zahir, and call him in from the cold. If Abu Kader were here, he would have sat with him and welcomed him properly." "Thank you, Mkader. But I think he wants me to come out to inform me of something. He hasn't opened the car door or knocked on the house door." "Why not? Let him come in." "It's all right. I think he's embarrassed. I'll go out to see what he wants." Zahir's weak voice was the sweetest sound to Fatima's ears that morning. She knew that her mother was fine, so everything would be all right. Zahir returned after a brief conversation with her brother to tell her daughters, "Get ready. We want to leave for the new house." Mkader asked, "Did you find a house for you?" "Where?" "It's a house near our house on the other side. Aren't you going to see it first?" "He told me it's a house still under construction. It's not ready yet because its occupants left it during the war and moved to Jordan. But it has a strong iron door, and that's what's needed." "That's what's needed?" "I want 4 walls and a door to close around myself and my children, and nothing more." "Mkader, doesn't this house have 4 walls and a door?" The notes of regret in Zahir's voice almost revealed the burdens of her heart if it hadn't been for the joy on her daughters' faces as they hurried to arrange the bedding on the ground and help Mkader clean the house, eager to escape to their father's car and their uncle's embrace, and to those 4 walls and the iron door, no matter what. They left their mother thanking Mkader and praying for her. When the wait grew long, Fatima reached for the car horn and blew it forcefully, ending Zahir's farewells, and she approached them smiling. She didn't forget to say as she entered the car, "Listen, girls. First of all, it's an incomplete house. There are no doors inside, no water taps, and no sinks. You'll have to get water from the well, and we will endure what we find. Is this acceptable?" Fatima shouted. "Acceptable? Anything is acceptable. Let's go, Uncle. I want us to have a house." Their mother said, "We'll pass by the demolished house now. I don't want any shouting or crying. And I won't allow bothering your uncle or forcing him to stop or anything like that. Understood? I want us to finish the story of the new house first. Then," Fatima heard her mother's words as her sisters did, understanding them with a heavy heart. She pressed her face against the car window, holding her breath as if about to see a ghost, something that dominated all her emotions. The car started, and in just a few minutes, the house began to appear among the neighboring houses. Fatima gathered all her energy, wanting to see the largest part of it in that moment before passing by with this car, which used to circle around it and stay under its shade. But the house began to recede bit by bit again, disappearing behind the neighboring houses on the other side, no longer towering above them, no longer boasting its beautiful details in its royal sitting on the mountaintop. The car stopped and everyone began to disembark, finding themselves in front of a small house with an iron door, separated from the road by a narrow path designed for planting flowers on either side, enclosed by a fence surrounding its courtyard, which is centered by a well for water. Fatima saw her uncle take the key from his pocket and open the door. She entered with her family to see what they would find, but she couldn't imagine what she saw. The floor was not tiled but was filled with remnants of construction, broken bricks, and sand. The large spaces inside were open to each other, with no doors or windows. She couldn't distinguish a room from a kitchen or a balcony from the rest of the rooms. She said, "Will we live here? I don't know. What do you think, my dear? Should we go back to Cater?" "No, no. Then we will live here. We will clean it, and we will ask the municipality for furniture, and we will manage, God willing. Is that okay? I suggest the following. Why don't you carry Ali and take Hanin to play with her in the well area, while I and your sisters clean the house?" The uncle said, "Then I will go to get your bedding that the neighbors took out of your house after it was demolished." They swore that the bedding wasn't damaged, and one of them swore that the electric lamps are still hanging from the ceiling without breaking. And he asked me to go and see for myself. And what difference will those details make? The house was demolished, my brother, and that's it. Well, maybe Ali and Hanin can benefit from that bedding until you finish cleaning the house. Nujla said, "Mom, and with what will we clean the house? We don't even have a broom." "Okay. Let's start by removing the large pieces of bricks and metal from the house, as much as we can until your uncle brings us cleaning tools. I will go then in the car so as not to delay you." The uncle turned towards the door to head to the car when he saw Zahir, wet with his friend Fathi, carrying brooms, mops, a bucket, and a rope for use with the well, along with other small items necessary for cleaning the house. The uncle smiled and said, "Come and see. The man of the house is fulfilling his duties perfectly." Zahir exclaimed in surprise, "Zahir, how did you know we needed all these things? My friend and I came here early this morning, and we tried to start cleaning instead of you, but the key was our problem. We then realized we needed many of these things first. Come to me, my dear, and let me hug you. I missed you so much." Zahir shifted a little and glanced at his friend out of the corner of his eye and said, "Am I a child, Mom, that you want to hug me? Let's start cleaning. I want to introduce you to my friend Fathi first." Zahir smiled and said, "Welcome, my son." But the uncle extended his hand for a handshake and said, "I want to shake hands with these two men firmly. I was impressed by what I saw from them today." He enthusiastically slapped his palm with Fathi's once and Zahir's once more, and said, "Now let's see how you did with the cleaning. But Fathi, shouldn't you be at school today?" "Yes, uncle. He's absent for one day, and my mother knows that I am helping Zahir so he can go to school with me tomorrow too." "That's good. The world is still a good place, my sister. Let's start working." Cleaning the house was much harder than Zahir had imagined. Sweeping the floor seemed never-ending, and the more she swept, the more dust hidden in the floor's crevices came out. By noon, the municipality trucks were unloading furniture in the well area, allowing Zahir to decide what she wanted to bring into the house and what should be discarded. Zahir laid down some of the rugs she had on the house floor and made sure to create a room for the girls and another for the boys, joining herself in the boys' room due to the shortage of rooms. Only one room remained at the front of the house, which she used for receiving guests. As for the space that greeted you when opening the front door, She made it a small living room for herself and her children despite its small size. And she created a small, tucked-away kitchen that she couldn't use for washing or cleaning due to the lack of water and drains, so all those tasks had to be done in the well area. The uncle started nailing pieces of old blankets that Ibtesam had used as curtains to separate the rooms instead of doors. Even the bathroom. He put a blanket on its door to be by the end of the day. The house was livable to the extent possible, and some of the neighbors had finished helping Ibtesam and took their leave to return to their homes. Fatima didn't know where her uncle had gotten all those sandwiches he was occasionally feeding her. But she was happy because someone today was noticing and remembering her. She took care of the little ones with a content heart and was pleased that she managed to whisper her small secret to her uncle when she said, "This young man, Fathi, is the one who helped me yesterday while I was carrying Haneen alone, lost among the crowds." And how much she was pleased with the looks of admiration and appreciation her uncle gave him as he shook her hand and nodded his head, smiling as if promising her that he would thank him on her behalf.